There is no perfect shirt or outfit for reviewing this movie, although Captain America maybe comes the closest, and he's on this. I wanted to talk a little bit about the movie Iron Sky.
This is very simple. The world is sick. And we are the doctors. The world is in need.
There's a certain subgenre of movies, or I think of it as its own genre. Movies that are incredibly ridiculous, over the top, intended to be over the top ridiculous, that nevertheless are trying to make a great point. And if they do this well, then I really enjoy them. A lot of times they don't do it well. Some of the great ones are Idiocracy. Idiocracy is a fabulous movie, and I am so glad that at least thus far they have not tried to follow it up and ruin it with a sequel. Another one, The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot. I don't think it gets nearly enough credit, but that is a fabulous movie full of over-the-top ridiculousness, and yet, man, is that a great flick. Tremors was a similar movie, though not necessarily making, well, not as obviously cosmic in sort of global in the point it was trying to make the way Idiocracy was. But Tremors comes out of the blue as a really bizarre, weird monster movie that's not really about a monster movie at all. Sharknado, which has a commentary about other disaster and monster films, was just, I thought it was brilliant, and it just immediately went downhill. It was just, the lightning does not strike twice, and it's very rare that any of the movies in this sort of genre I'm describing, that they have a sequel that lives up to them. One of these, in my mind, is Iron Sky. Iron Sky, I did watch the sequel, and I think there was a third one that I got partway in, and it just doesn't do it. But oddly enough, the original Iron Sky movie, I think it's amazing. I've watched it a number of times. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, brief synopsis. Iron Sky is about a colony of Nazis living on the dark side of the moon. They have been there since the early 1940s, I believe the exact time frame they have for planting that colony. Obviously, they've been there all this time, and they are keenly aware of the fact that they had lost the war on Earth. They are alone out there on the dark side of the moon, and they are preparing their weapons and super weapons for the day that they will come back and they will liberate the earth, presumably from Bolshevism and Jewish people and whatever else sort of thing in good Nazi fashion. When we send astronauts to the moon, the first exploration of the dark side of the moon, one of them is killed, the other one is captured. The Nazis end up capturing an American astronaut who happens to be black. They inject him with a formula of albinozensis. I'm not going to say it right. They give him some fake secret formula that will turn him into an albino. Who would have ever thought you'd see this in cinema ever? This gentleman's hair, his skin, his eyes all change color, and in good National Socialist fashion, our people on the dark side of the moon believe that not only is he going to be thrilled by this change, he's going to be very grateful to them for having done it to him, which of course does not happen. These Nazis living on the dark side of the moon then send a team to Earth to try to determine whether the time is right for them to strike, to come to Earth and liberate it for National Socialism, whether the time is come or not. And their team, made up of a teacher and the future and will be soon Führer, Jan Führer from the military. They go to Earth and they run into the campaign manager for the President of the United States, who is running for re-election. Both of whom happen to be women, which is an interesting part of the story. The incumbent president is a woman and her campaign manager is a woman. And they all fall in together when the campaign manager becomes enamored with how brilliantly the Nazis do propaganda. She is basically blown away by the great way that they produce rhetoric. She takes the young Nazi teacher to see the president and asks her to define for her what is a National Socialist, or what does it mean to you? And the speech transitions nicely into the president giving this speech with the American flag waving behind her, and everybody is very inspired. And ultimately, the Nazis decide that it's time to come to Earth. They launch all of their space vehicles, including this giant Valkyra device, this thing that's I don't know, like 5,000 aircraft carrier size, that's going to swoop down and take over the world. Almost a Captain America, the movie or comic book sort of storyline with what Hydra did. There's some interesting similarities there, which brings in Captain America, and more will later. Then there's a conflict with the American fleet. The incumbent president ends up, not only is she thrilled, not only does she get a war, which always helps an incumbent get reelected, she gets a clean war in the sense that there's no political questioning of motivation of what's going. She literally gets a batch of Nazis that are still in existence that are attacking the earth, and she's thrilled that she gets this conflict. And various other nations, all but one, turn out to have been secretly arming their space vehicles all along. They join with the United States to defeat the Nazi invasion. So over the top, weird, bizarre story, and you're like, what in the world is it with this? But it goes to that interesting aspect of human nature of wanting to be altruistic, of wanting to believe that we're the good guys, that Hitler and Stalin got up every morning and had goals to do good things. It's just that their idea of what was good was different than the overwhelming majority of us who are stable and sane and modern, however you want to define that, without getting into it. But their idea of what was good is what was different. Unless you have an actual sort of disorder, you don't sit around and plot evil things you want to do because they're evil. Even if you kill people, most murderers do it because of it's a crime of passion, or they believe that it's a good thing for some reason or another, you see. And so the weird altruism that we experience of these Nazis on the moon who only want to come home and save the world, and the disillusionment that we see the female teacher from the Nazis go through because she experiences our world and she becomes exposed to more, therefore, of the actual history of the Nazi Party. She's only ever heard propaganda. She's only ever heard it defined in the most positive ways possible, and she's stunned to come across some neo-Nazi skinheads that don't treat her with respect as an Aryan female, right? Because this is part of her journey of disillusionment. On the other hand, the Americans, who are progressive enough that there's an American female incumbent president with a lady running her campaign for re-election, they are mesmerized by the National Socialist message and its ability to inspire people. They're the ones that are overjoyed that there's a war so that they have a good old-fashioned war to get reelected. There's this sort of inverse of your expectations of who's the bad guy, and it's not all that clear. Who's the villain, and it's not all that clear. And in the end, I'd say the whole movie is really encapsulated in that moment where the Nazi teacher is introduced to the president by the campaign manager and asked to define National Socialism and what it means to her. Because we get a perfect example of rhetoric, what's sometimes called propaganda, but really in a political science sense, rhetoric, which is where you manipulate people's thoughts and emotions without really promising them anything. And so our teacher, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan teacher, goes into a little speech of National Socialism to me means the restoration of our nation, of its greatness, of the historic greatness being reborn, but not being trapped in the past, because we are people of the future. We are deeply rooted in all those customs and traditions of the great people that came before, building towards the great things that are going to come. We are the children of our ancestors who built these things with the faith and the blood that we would go on to build greater things. We are the daughters and sons of loving mothers, of protective and strong fathers, of brave people who, and she goes on like this until, everyone's got a tear in their eye, and the President of the United States is then giving the speech as it fades in, and everybody's got a tear in their eye and everybody's cheering. And it's brilliantly done because none of that says anything. Because people have different opinions about history. They have different opinions of what future that should lead to. People maybe didn't even have a good home life, but they had an idea of what a good home life would be like. And she invokes that, this perfect rhetoric, invokes it without clearly defining what that means, right? And so everybody gets a tear in their eye. Everybody's inspired. And that's really the key moment, I think, in the movie that gives away the whole crux of it. All the other stuff is window dressing, the over-the-top injecting the guy with the albino serum, which he does get undone, by the way, and ends up with the Aryan girl, the Nazi teacher. And everything sort of works out in the end. But by the end, you really see that in the middle of all this over-the-top crazy behavior, there is not a clear good and evil. It is a lot of gray area, and it's a lot of people just fumbling along because they want power, and they'll tell you whatever they need to get power. And we see it both in the American camp and the Nazi camp. And by the end of the movie, we're sort of left with, well, what do we do now, and where is it going from there? And it's not entirely clear, but it really ends up being a brilliant commentary on that sort of rhetoric, the manipulation of people's good intentions, and how it's gray. Your good intentions can be manipulated into downright evil, or to good, or to anything in between. And by being manipulated in this way, you can let yourself be used by these political figures and factions. And you could end up a Nazi in a colony on the dark side of the moon, or running for re-election, a president of the United States, and you're no less a prisoner to this cycle of ideological rhetoric and the attempt at, I don't want to say brainwashing, that's too strong, but to manipulate us. It's in everything. I mean, it's in our advertising, and it's there because it works. It's used to sell us products, including politicians, including causes, including wars, including whatever. And the genius of a movie that begins with a whole colony of Nazis on the moon getting ready to attack, a brilliant setup, like for a video game where you just shoot a bunch of bad guys, and it ends up giving us this very complex series of feelings, emotions, observations, and a very complex character development of some very ridiculous characters who continue to be over the top ridiculous, and yet we see them develop, and it says so much about human nature, human politics, human thinking, the manipulation of our altruism. It just really captures everything nicely. So I love it. Iron Sky, that's one of those, like I said, I watched the sequel and part of another one, but that first one, Iron Sky, boy, that's a good movie. And it will always be there on my list of occasionally rewatching when I just want some nice fun that makes a good point. And it'll be on the list with Idiocracy, Tremors, Sharknado, The Man Who Killed Hitler, and then The Bigfoot. You name it. Good stuff. Iron Sky, watch it, love it. Let me know what you think. Live long and prosper.
But we are the vitamin. The world's weary, but we are the strength. We are here to make the world healthy once again.